Happy Sunday, church family. Glad to see you today. This morning, I want us to study a text that includes one of the more famous statements that our Master uttered in his ministry. There are a handful of little moments in time that occurred, not just with Jesus, but with the Lord, but also with his apostles and back in the Old Testament as well, that included a famous event or a phrase that was uttered or something that happened that became so famous it extends beyond the realm of Bible study. These are those little phrases that everyone knows, whether they have ever cracked open a Bible before. Just about everybody, if you ask them, what's John 3:16, they could tell you. If not quote it verbatim, they could do a pretty good job paraphrasing that famous text. Or if you ask them how Israel got out of Egypt and what the famous moment was, if for no other reason than they've seen Charlton Heston do it, they can recite the account of the Red Sea crossing. There are just little phrases, there are little moments, especially as we go to open your Bibles to the book of John. There are little phrases and little moments and little statements that have been uttered by our Master that have become larger than life, that have become bigger than the Bible study sphere in which we consider them. Judge not that you be not judged is another famous one, apart from what he says in John 3:16. So we're going to study this morning an account that includes another one of those phrases. It's found in John chapter 8. It's not the text that LB read to us. It's right around there, but I wanted to wait until we get there. I want us to consider a little bit of the context first. I want us to appreciate the mindset of the Lord and what's going on around him, who these people are, to whom he is speaking, about whom he is speaking, and of course he himself who is doing the talking. So I want to appreciate that for just a couple of minutes before we dig into the meat of the sermon, which is found in John chapter 8. But I want to start with you this morning in John chapter 7, that which precedes our text. There are three major players, for lack of a better word, three principal characters in this little play that we're going to consider. The first is Jesus, who in the context of this moment in time and this statement that he's going to utter and why he says it, he is going to be thought of here as an innocent victim. He is an innocent victim because he is innocent. He is innocent because he is sinless. Never has, never did do anything ever wrong. Every step that he took was the step of righteousness. Every word that he said was the word of God because he is God. He never did anything worthy of even dislike, much less hatred, and yet he was the primary recipient of vitriol and bitter, jealous, envious hatred. That's our Master. And if he is hated for doing nothing wrong, do not be surprised when you find yourself hated. Even though you have done some things wrong here and there, you'll still be hated sometimes far beyond what you deserve. That's just how it goes. You can't control how people react to you. If you find yourself having enemies, don't be surprised. If a man who never did anything wrong, but who, as your Bible tells you, went about doing good, he didn't just sit in a corner and do nothing. He actively did that which was righteous, holy, and good. And if he could have enemies, and he had many of them, don't be surprised when you just doing your best or just trying to do your best, when you find yourself also having enemies. He's innocent, and he is a victim. Because in this particular situation, where we start in John 7 and we spill over into John 8, he's going to find himself not just the subject of ire, but the target of a conspiracy to destroy him. First, to destroy him physically. They're going to try to kill him. And then when that fails, they will try to destroy him reputationally. So let's consider Jesus as this innocent victim in the account. We're going to start in John 7. We're not going to read, it says, I got verses 1 through 31 on the screen behind me. We're going to go all the way through verse 53, just kind of summarizing it before we really get into John 8. But I just want you to be in mind of John chapter 7, the first 31 verses. The summary of it is basically this. It is the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, one of the major Jewish holidays. The Feast of Booths it's sometimes called, or Succoth it's also called, where the Jews would all gather in Jerusalem and they would live for a little bit in makeshift tents and so forth, as a reminder of their time, their ancestors' time, wandering in the wilderness, living in such portable dwelling places as that, and God leading them to the promised land. So in the period of time when it's time to go to Jerusalem to celebrate that, Jesus is actually up in Galilee. He's in his hometown. He's with his family. And his brothers, his half-brothers, the other children of Mary and the sons of Joseph, they say to him, why don't you go down, or go up in elevation, why don't you go down to Jerusalem and make yourself known? Why don't you show openly who you are? You claim to be the Messiah, so go out there, stand on the biggest stage, and just make a show. Make a big spectacle of yourself. Do some big grandiose miracles. Let everybody see that you are who you claim to be. And John gives you a little commentary there in the middle of that little opening text. Neither do his brothers believe in him. They'll come around, but at this point in his ministry, his own family do not believe he's the Messiah. What they want is to see a grand display. What they want is a big show. They want him to do what they think people normally should do, which is if you got the power, you should flaunt the power. If you got the stage, you should want to be on the stage. And Jesus just isn't made that way. Jesus isn't designed that way. He reflects the Father. And what God would have his children to be is humble, meek, lowly, and mild. Of all people who deserve to be on the pedestal, to receive the adulation of men, to make the spectacle, he is the one who says, that's not me. I'm not here to make a big spectacle. I'm not here to go on the stage. You go on, he says this to his brothers. You go on to Jerusalem. You start the feast. And so they go. And afterward, he goes himself, privately, secretly, subtly. He slips into the town and he starts teaching and preaching, as he always did. This is not anything out of the ordinary. He teaches, he preaches, he works some miracles in a private, small setting. And as he does, murmuring starts to follow him. A rumor starts to spread amongst the people. He's here. He's here. The miracle man is here. This one that we've heard about for a year and a half, 2 years now. He's here. He's in town. He's in town. And a debate starts to rise. Is this really the Christ? And some say, no, he's a liar. And some say he is the Christ. And the more Jesus teaches, and the more miracles Jesus works, and the more things that Jesus does, and just Jesus being Jesus, those who say, no, he's not, starts to die out. And those who say, well, he must be, starts to rise in elevation and in vocalization. People start to say, but look at all his miracles. How many miracles does it take before a man who claims to be the Messiah is proven to be the Messiah? How many more must he do that the Messiah wouldn't do? And the rumors start to spread, and that Jesus is here, and that Jesus is the Messiah, which turns the ire to this second group of people, these guilty assailants. Jesus is innocent. He's a victim because he's targeted. Who's targeting him? These guilty people. They are guilty because they are sinful. They are guilty because they have turned their attention and put their target on an innocent person. And they have desired to destroy this innocent person purely because he has the temerity to teach that which goes against their traditions. Because he simply has the audacity to not kowtow to their trumped up, made up, idealized version of themselves as the leaders of all the people. Because he doesn't bend that way, they want him destroyed and taken out of the way. And they'll justify it whatever way they need to. They'll say they're doing it for the greater good, they're doing it for their people, but really it's just because they're petty, they're small, they're threatened, and they want to destroy. They're guilty. They hear the same rumors, the same murmurings of this person who's come to town, and they know he's their enemy. They've got to destroy him. And so they seek him out to find him, to take him, to kill him, but he slips through their grasp, as he did many times before. Many times in the ministry of Jesus, these people, these Pharisees, these scribes, these chief priests, usually Sadducees, these people would come, these so-called religious leaders, and they would try to arrest him, try to get their hands on him, and he would just go away. Sometimes miraculously, he'd just be gone. And sometimes a throng of people, a huge crowd of people would gather, and he would just slip through them because it wasn't yet his time to be taken. His time would come later, and then he would allow them to take him. But here when they want to take him by force and it's not yet his time, they just can't seem to get their hands on him. And so they send their temple guard. They send a goon squad. Go get him. You get him, you bring him back here, and we're going to get our hands on him. We're going to try him, we're going to convict him, we're going to find him guilty. Not a real trial. No, there's no charges really here. It's just whatever we want to do. This is mob justice. You get your hands on him, you bring him to us, and we're going to convict him and find him guilty. So the temple guard go. And they sit amongst the same crowd that had been talking about him this whole time. And they listen to him teach the same sermons he'd been teaching. And they witness the same miracles he'd been doing. And the stirring of the people gets so elevated, and people start talking so much. The Pharisees, the more they hear about him, the more they see him, the more exasperated they get. They find their temple guard, they call him back over there, and they come back to them empty-handed, and they say, "Where is he? We sent you to arrest him. We sent you to bring him here. Why haven't you arrested him? Why haven't we killed him yet?" And they say, "No one's ever taught like this man. We don't want to arrest him. No one's ever done what this man has done. No one's ever lived like this man has lived. No one's ever spoken like this man has spoken. We're not going to arrest him. He's innocent." And they don't say it, but the implication is, you're guilty. You guilty assailants who just want to destroy a man because he's not like you. So they realize at the end of John chapter 7, they can't kill him. Not yet. They've tried, and he's slipped through the cracks, he's slipped through their grasp, he's gotten away, the people are all on his side. You try and take him now, the people all turn against you. That defeats the purpose when they want their power and authority. So if they can't kill him physically, they come to the decision. They all go to their own houses, that's the end of John 7. They all go their own way, and Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives, that's John 8:1. And at some point between here and there, they make a decision amongst themselves, these conspirators. If we can't kill him physically, let's do one better. Let's destroy him reputationally. If we can't take his body, let's take his influence. If we can't kill him, let's ruin him. And thus they concoct a plan which involves the third player in this play, the guilty victim. She's a victim because she's a pawn. She's being used and abused solely for the purposes of these people's petty desires to destroy Jesus. They don't care anything about her. They don't even care that she's guilty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that she's guilty. It doesn't matter that she has the right to a trial. None of that matters. None of the details matter to them at all. It has nothing to do with her. She's just a pawn. She's a victim. But she is guilty because they find her caught in the very act of adultery. That's where we are. That's our setting. Let's read the text in its entirety, which means we're going to spoil the ending, but we should already know it because it's going to include that famous phrase. But let's read the text in its entirety, and then I have just a handful of points to make for you before I leave you with a lesson to think about. Read with me John chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Again, remember how John 7:53, how the text ends. All those people who couldn't kill him, they go to their own houses, and Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives. John 8:2. And early in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people came to him and sat down and taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they say to him, "Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say?" This they said, tempting him, that they might have reason to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. So when they continued asking him, he lifted himself up and said to them, "He that is without sin, let him cast the first stone among you." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the eldest even to the youngest. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing in the midst. And Jesus had lifted himself. He saw that no one was there but the woman. And he said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No man, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." There it is in the middle of that reading, that famous statement uttered by the Lord, one of those that everybody knows, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." It's one of those, not only do we know it, but we pretty much all know it in the old King James. Just like we all quote, if you ask somebody on the street, what's John 3:16? For God so loved the world. We quote it from the old because it's so ubiquitous, it's so well known in that way. So everybody's familiar with it. Doesn't mean they use it properly. Doesn't mean they appreciate the context or they know the next thing that he said. But they know that phrase, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." There are three players in this play. There is the Lord, there are the leaders, and there is the lady in the middle. Let's take them in turn. Let's start with the leaders. Let's begin with the show. I'll remind you how John 7 begins with Jesus' brothers saying, "Go down to the city and make a big show. Present yourself openly. Show everybody that you are who you claim to be. Let's see the show." And Jesus says, "I'm not one to come and make a show. That's too braggadocious." Jesus is more humble than that. But these Pharisees, not more humble than that. They're perfectly capable of being prideful enough to make a big show. So I imagine the setting is similar to how it would have been any other time that Jesus was teaching and preaching. It always looked the same, because that's just the way it always looked. The teacher would be sitting, the audience would be standing. By the way, you're welcome. We changed that a long time ago. The teacher would be sitting, the audience would be standing kind of in a crescent moon shape around him, listening to what he has to say. And as they're listening, as it always happens, there's a commotion and the attention starts to be turned away. You hear this commotion. You see this cloud of people start to form. You look and there it is, the sea of people parts, and here they come. Here come those same ones he was dealing with yesterday, the same ones he'll deal with tomorrow. Here comes these Pharisees, these religious leaders, these scribes, these chief priests, and they've got a woman by the wrist. She was caught, as we're going to notice again, in the very act of adultery, so she's probably not much dressed. She's probably got tears streaming down her face, and they've got her by the wrist, and they're dragging her. And my Bible says in John 8, verse 3, that they set her in the midst, between Jesus and this crowd of people and them on the other side, as if it's on a debate stage and they're going to destroy him. And they set her in the midst, it says, but that sounds far too gentle for what the word actually means. The phrase literally means they put her on display. They made a grand spectacle of this woman. They made sure everyone saw who she was, holding her by the wrist. Look at this woman. Look what we found. Look at the catch that we've got. And they throw her down in front of all to see. She's guilty. But she is very much a victim in this. We'll come back to her. So they make their show. They throw her down for all to see. They make their grand display, and they think we've got Jesus. We've got him like a bull between the horns. And thus comes the test. Look at verses 4 and 5. They say to him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commands us that such should be stoned to death. But what say you? This is their test. This is their scheme. When they first concocted this idea, they didn't just stumble upon this. This was a scheme. And when they schemed this together, here's what they thought. No matter what he says, we're going to have him. If he says this, then we'll say that. If he does this, then we'll do that. No matter what he does, we're going to have him. We're going to be able to turn the people against him. Let's say he says, stone her, kill her. Such says the law, such should be done. All right, then we'll tell all the people, he's heartless, he's callous, he cares nothing for mercy. We can work with that. We can destroy his influence that way. We can diminish him. We can make him look not so special and unique when he's like that, because then he'll be just like all of us. Or he'll say, don't stone her to death. Don't kill her. Let her go. And then we'll have him. Because the law says she should be stoned. And it does. That is the Decalogue. You break the 10 Commandments, you're stoned to death. Adultery is one of them. So we'll have him. And we'll be able to tell everybody from here to Damascus that this Jesus who claims to be this great person really hates Moses and hates his law and doesn't want us to follow his law. All the things that we've been telling the people that he's been denying, now we'll have him on record. We'll have him on tape. Everyone will hear it. Everyone will know he said, no, don't stone her. So no matter what he does or says, we're going to have him. That's the test. Now let's pivot from these leaders to the Lord. Let's get his answer. The Lord's answer is not the word so famous from this text. The Lord's answer is silence. That's the answer. Look with me in John 8, verse 6. This they said, tempting him that they might have reason to accuse him, which we already established. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. This is his answer. And it has long puzzled Bible students and Bible scholars and people who have sought to finish this text for the Lord. If he wanted it finished, he would have inspired John to write it. But we wonder and we question. And it used to be when you had to go to a library and look up old books, you could find them, you could scour, and you could find what the scholars have said. Now you can do a quick Google search, and you can find a plethora of theories. What did Jesus write on the ground? Am I alone? Have you wondered it? What did Jesus write on the ground? He wrote something that's not made up, but what did he write? First of all, if you were supposed to know, you would know. Which makes all of these speculations nothing more than just that. Idle talk, idle speculation. It's fun and it's fair to do every now and then just for kicks, but it's no Bible there. So you'll read all kinds of different theories. The most prominent one that I have read from a multitude of people is he was writing the names of the accusers. I just don't get why that's such a huge deal. But what they argue is, well, he wrote their names on the ground, see every one of them, so that shamed them. Why does reading your name in the sand shame you? I never understood that. But never mind the fact, that doesn't matter, because your text makes it very explicitly clear that there was nothing in what he wrote that motivated them to change. As he's writing on the ground, your text says they continued pestering him for an answer. So they're not seeing anything in the sand that's making them question. It's not till he finally is forced to say something, then they change. Then they go away. So there's nothing in the sand that's shaming them. It's the words of Jesus that will shame them. So then what did he write? I think the question misses the entire point. I think it played out like this. Jesus is witnessing this whole big charade, this big spectacle, this big monkey trial. And they throw this woman down. They say, what do you say? Because she's supposed to be stoned, right? Are you going to deny that? What do you do? What do you say? Huh? Let's hear it, Jesus. Let's hear it. They're being very loud. They're being very bombastic. They're being very in your face. And Jesus takes the opposite approach. Jesus just bends down. And he just starts moving his finger in the sand. And I don't know what he wrote either. He may have been writing Greek, something in Greek. Greek has a very fluid flowiness to it, to its language, and it makes it very fun to trace in the sand. So maybe he's just writing some Greek letters. You know, the rho symbol, like a little slanty P, that's very fun to write. Or maybe like an omega. Or maybe he's writing Hebrew. Hebrew is very sharp edge, easy. Some squiggles here and some hard edges here. That's very easy to draw in the sand to make the shapes pronounced. So maybe he's just doing that. The point is, they're over here just chirping and chirping and chirping and screaming and saying, let's hear your answer, let's hear your answer, what's your answer? And he is showing them with his body language that he is not going to play their game. That he is not going to be a part of their using this woman to get to him. That he is not going to participate in their shaming this person. Instead, he is going to completely detach himself from the whole thing. He is just going to doodle on the sand. And after they continue pestering him, your Bible says he does something like this. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And he goes back to the ground and he writes some more. And he stays down there until the next thing happens. If you spend this time wondering what he wrote, you miss why he wrote. If you're so interested in what his finger was tracing, you miss the fact that he completely detaches himself from this situation because he knows exactly what they're doing. That was the one thing they didn't consider. They had in mind, if he says this, we'll do this. If he says that, we'll do that. They didn't anticipate him saying nothing and not playing the game. But when they demanded an answer, his answer is both. His answer is, should she be stoned? Yes! She actually should be stoned. Here's the thing. So should everybody. Because they all have sinned. And they all are guilty. So who's going to stone this person? The one who hasn't sinned. You cast the first one. You throw first. This is not Jesus excusing a sinner. That's the way the phrase is misused and misapplied and twisted. Oh, we can't tell anyone they've done anything wrong. No, Jesus is about to tell her in a minute she's done something wrong. This is not about not telling someone they can do something. This is not about telling someone that they've done something wrong, that you're not allowed to do that. No. That's not the point here. The point here is this woman is not on trial, so to speak, because of her sin. She's being used because of Jesus' innocence. And Jesus isn't playing that game. So he says, I'm going to call you out on your hypocrisy. To use her sin to attack me for my sinlessness, covering up your own sin. So let's find the one who's sinless, who's never done anything wrong, and you throw the stone first. The lesson is that he shames them. After he makes that statement and he goes back to the ground, it says that the Pharisees, a blue moon, rare bird occurrence if there ever was one, actually felt bad. Their hearts were pricked, and they turned and they went away. And then your Bible very specifically tells you from oldest to youngest. That's not there for nothing. When the Sanhedrin voted, when the Jewish ruling council of wise old men who make decisions, whenever they would vote, they would always vote youngest two oldest. Because they understood that if we have to cast a yea-nay vote, if the oldest and wisest and most respected among us votes first, and he votes yes, that's going to put a lot of pressure on this young person who doesn't know as much, who's a bit intimidated, who's easily swayed to look and think, I don't really know if I know what to vote. What should I vote here? Well, okay, the old guy says yes. I think I'll just vote yes. In which case, why are you even here? You're just going to parrot what he says. So they made them vote youngest to oldest. So they wouldn't be swayed, they wouldn't be influenced, and then the oldest one would vote last to give kind of, not necessarily a deciding vote, but a most seasoned and well-reasoned vote on the subject. But on this occasion, they lost the war. They lost the fight with Jesus. They're not winning this round. And so they went away. The oldest setting the example. Walk away, gentlemen. We lost this one. Oldest to youngest. And while they're walking away, mind you, the master is back on the ground, just tracing and doodling away. Which takes us to the last figure of this play, the lady. This guilty, adulterous woman. And Jesus stands back up. He sees, and I'm sure there's a crowd still around, but they're not involved in this. All the accusers are gone. There's no one here but he and this woman. And he says just that very thing. He says, woman, where are your accusers? Is there no one here to condemn you? Is there no one here to cast a stone at you? Is there no one here to kill you for the crime for which you are guilty? And she says, I have no one here, Lord. And so he says, neither do I condemn you. I would point out that as far as these Pharisees are concerned, Jesus has no authority here. He's just some rabbi. As far as they're concerned, he's just one of hundreds of teachers who have people who will listen to them teach. That's it. He's special. Obviously, we know that, but even in the community, he's special because he can do certain things that a random rabbi cannot. But as far as they're concerned, he's just a rabbi with his britches too big. But they still put on him the call. They put him in the shoes of having to be the judge. What do you say? Should we stone her or not? Because that's the game they want to play. Jesus doesn't even put himself in that position until the end when he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. What happens to this woman? What happens to this guilty of adultery person? She goes away unkilled, unshamed, and uncondemned. Other than Jesus, everyone who walked away that day, she's the only one who walked away with a good heart, feeling better about herself than when she arrived, because even the Pharisees walked away feeling bad. She walked away feeling forgiven. Now, I have 3 quick points to make from that, just to rattle them off and then I'm done. Number 1, God does not favor punishment. That doesn't mean that God will not punish. God will punish, but God does not favor punishment. God tends toward mercy. What that means, you know what that means. You may not know how it's defined, but you can feel it, you can sense it, because all of us are guilty and yet all of us are still here. We're all still here because we've been here long enough. The world has been around long enough for Jesus to come into this world, not to condemn it, but to save it. John 3:17. The very fact that we are given by God a second, third, 400th chance is because he is inclined toward mercy. He doesn't want to destroy. Question. Jesus makes the famous statement, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. Who was without sin on that occasion? Jesus. Why did not he cast the stone? Because he didn't wanna. Because God tends toward mercy. Something those Pharisees did not appreciate. Second lesson. God does not excuse sin. And I almost wrote after that, God forgives sin. It's true, but that's not really the point we learn from the text in John 8. The point we learn from the text is God does not excuse sin, he expects faithfulness. This woman in the midst was guilty of sin. Nothing Jesus says or does not do excuses her of her sin. What he does is he forgives her and then leaves her with the impression, I know what you did, don't do it anymore. A couple of chapters earlier in John, Jesus heals a man who couldn't walk, and it becomes, because it was on the Sabbath day, it's this big hubbub, and the Pharisees get all hot and bothered as they're wont to do, and Jesus defends his actions, and this man comes to him a little bit later, and Jesus says, you're healed now. Go and sin no more. And then he adds, lest a worse thing come upon you. Oh, what could be worse than being a person forced to be a beggar on the street who can't use half his body. What could be worse than that? Hell is worse than that. Here's this woman who is minutes away, if the words go the wrong way, from being tied to a post and having giant rocks hurled at her head until she loses consciousness, her brain splits open and her blood oozes out and she dies. It is not pretty to be stoned. They're not picking up little rocks. They're picking up rocks and they're hammering your head until you're dead. What could be worse than that? Hell is worse than that. God does not excuse sin. He expects faithfulness. To this woman, I will not condemn you. Go and sin no more. Third point and final. God does not tolerate hypocrites. God blesses the sincere. I choose to believe. The Bible doesn't give me the details. But love believes all things, so I choose to believe this woman went away and heeded her Lord's advice and sinned no more. She made mistakes, but I mean she got out of the adultery business at least. I choose to believe she turned her life around and lived better than how her day started. I choose to believe she was sincere in her heart and convictions to do righteousness. On the other hand, these Pharisees, they went away with their hearts pricked, and immediately thereafter, they come back to the scene ready to argue again. They didn't learn squat. God does not tolerate hypocrites. When you study the gospel account, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you walk through the ministry of Jesus, you are you're following a man, God in the flesh, surrounded entirely by sinful people. You have to be very patient to be the only sinless human being on the planet. Even amongst his own closest disciples. Lord, how many times shall my brethren sin against me and I forgive them? Peter asked. 7 times? Peter, you sinned 7 times today. How can you ask that question? These are his closest ones. When you're that surrounded by sin, not blowing up the world is tremendous on Jesus' part. But he came not to condemn the world because it was already condemned. John 3:17. And yet, the only time he ever got angry, the only time you ever saw ire in his eyes, the only time he ever brandished a whip was against a hypocrite who was taking advantage of his so-called godly position for his own betterment and someone else's detriment. Those people, Jesus had no tolerance for, no patience for. He didn't brandish a whip when he encountered an adulteress, but he brandished a whip when he encountered a money changer in John 2. He brandished a whip. He called them hypocrites and liars, and their mouth is an open sepulcher. He said all those things whenever he met a hypocrite. Who are these Pharisees? They are so-called leaders, but they are not leaders. A leader has people following them. A leader wants people to follow them, and a leader has people that want to follow them. A leader will turn around and say, come follow me, here's the way we're going, it's good, it's good, it's good, we can do it. The Pharisees don't care about the people they make follow them. They're in it for themselves. They did not care about this woman, whether she was guilty or innocent, should die or not die. They walked away and left this person that by their own admission was worthy of stoning. They just let her go because they didn't care about her at all. All they cared about was getting to Jesus. Hypocrites. That's the one that Jesus turns his ire to the most. So I leave you with this lesson. Here's your lesson. Be merciful, because your master is merciful. You will have people, in fact, I don't even have to speculate. I know. Everybody, just right now, take a moment and think about someone who's wronged you. You don't have to think hard, I'm sure. Unless you're too little, it hasn't happened yet. I'm sorry to tell you, it will happen eventually. Somebody has done you dirty. Somebody has wronged you. Now, what do you want to do? Don't you just want to forgive that person? Oh, that person is guilty. That person is worthy of death. Absolutely they are. And so are you. They are just as worthy of death as you are. Guess what? They are just as recipient to the gospel as you are. They are just as invited to be saved as you are. Be merciful. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. One day God will cast a stone. One day his mercy will run out. One day the judge will render his verdict. Until then, don't be like the Pharisees. Don't be hypocrites who want mercy but won't extend mercy. You be merciful, because you're an adulterous woman and you need to be uncondemned. You need to be killed, but you want to be uncondemned. So be merciful. And if you are here this morning and that's your condition, either as the guilty party or as someone who doesn't think he is and you want to attack someone who is, you're also the guilty party. Come to Jesus. Be forgiven. If you're not a Christian, be saved today. Believing that Jesus will save you. Repenting to Him because you need to be saved, because you've committed sins that have separated you from Him. Confessing your faith in Him as the Savior and the Lord and King. Then being baptized for that salvation that He extends to you through His blood. Then just be faithful. You will mess up. Just be faithful. And when you mess up, you'll be thankful for the privilege to pray and ask for forgiveness. And then you will extend that same privilege to those who ask it for you. If you are a Christian but you've stopped being faithful, turn back before His mercy runs out. Can we help you this morning? If we can, step forward right now. Let us know as we stand and sing.